We give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty. Those words suddenly feel very different when you understand what is allegedly happening behind the palace walls. King Charles has reportedly reached the ugliest breaking point of his relationship with Camilla, and this time he did not look away. According to reports cited in the original story, Camilla was caught doing something the palace had warned her never to do. Charles then turned toward William and Catherine, transferring authority at the very moment Camilla believed her position was secure. Suddenly, she was facing a future with less power, less influence, and almost no leverage, and what she allegedly planned next could create an even bigger crisis. But to understand why this royal power struggle exploded, we have to go back to the arrest that changed everything. On February 19, 2026, what began as an ordinary winter morning in Norfolk reportedly became one of the darkest days for the modern monarchy. Police arrived at a quiet country property, and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the king's own brother, was arrested on his 66th birthday. The reported charge was misconduct in public office. But behind that allegation was an even more explosive claim that during his time as a British trade envoy between 2010 and 2011, Andrew had allegedly passed highly classified British government intelligence to Jeffrey Epstein. That allegation transformed the story from a royal embarrassment into a potential national security disaster. Epstein was not simply a disgraced billionaire. He had built relationships with politicians, billionaires, celebrities, and other powerful figures, creating an environment where access and compromising information could become weapons. So the suggestion that a senior British royal may have provided classified information to him raised a terrifying question: how much had already been compromised, and how long had the palace known? That morning, Charles was reportedly dealing with his own serious health problems while the arrest dominated headlines across Britain. But the most damaging part of the story was not simply Andrew's arrest. It was the claim that Charles had known more than the public had been told. According to sources cited in the original report, intelligence officials had monitored Andrew's activities for years and allegedly delivered reports to Buckingham Palace. Critics argued that the palace only acted when public pressure became impossible to ignore. Andrew's public duties had already been removed after his disastrous 2019 BBC interview, while his royal titles were stripped in 2025. But those actions came after years of controversy and growing public outrage. The questions became even harder to avoid during a 2025 royal walkabout at Lichfield Cathedral. Charles was meeting crowds when a protester reportedly shouted directly at him, asking how long he had known about Andrew and Epstein and whether police had been asked to cover anything up. Charles continued walking and did not answer. That silence became part of the story. Public confidence was already under pressure. Polling cited in the original script suggested that support for the monarchy had fallen significantly. While many people believed the royal family needed to respond more aggressively to the Epstein controversy, and then the crisis reached Charles's immediate family. Andrew's daughters were reportedly struggling with the consequences of their father's scandal. Princess Eugenie was described as deeply angry, while Princess Beatrix was reportedly devastated by the shame surrounding the situation. The family was breaking apart at exactly the moment the monarchy needed unity, and that was when William stepped forward. William had reportedly warned for years that Andrew represented a serious threat to the institution. After the 2019 BBC interview, he allegedly pushed Charles and Queen Elizabeth to remove Andrew from public life. But those warnings did not produce the decisive action William wanted. Now everything had changed. With Andrew arrested, William reportedly began directing the crisis response himself, and the speed of his involvement suggested something important. This was not simply a son helping his father. It looked increasingly like a future king taking control of an institution that was struggling to manage its own crisis. Then came the development that pushed the conflict directly into Charles and Camilla's household. While the palace was attempting to distance itself from everyone connected to the scandal, Camilla was reportedly in contact with Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's former wife and longtime associate. To Camilla, it was reportedly an old friendship built over decades. To William, it represented something completely different, a dangerous connection at precisely the wrong moment. And that is where the battle over the future of the monarchy allegedly became personal. Charles had become king in September 2022 at the age of 73, after waiting approximately 7 decades for the throne. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for one moment. Yet only a short time after becoming king, cancer entered his life. Then, in March 2024, Catherine announced her own cancer diagnosis following abdominal surgery and began treatment. Suddenly, both the king and the future queen were dealing with cancer. The monarchy had lost 2 of its most important working figures at the same time, and William was forced into a more prominent role. He did not need a coronation to become central to the institution. He simply needed to start making decisions. One visible sign of that transition came when Charles handed William and Catherine authority connected to royal warrants. On the surface, it looked administrative, But symbolically, it suggested that the king was becoming increasingly comfortable with his heir exercising responsibilities traditionally associated with the sovereign. The larger shift, however, was happening around Andrew. According to the story presented in the original script, William had become heavily involved in decisions concerning Andrew's titles, his position, and his removal from Royal Lodge. Every crisis seemed to push more responsibility toward the Waleses. William's style was also reportedly very different from Charles's. Charles had spent decades operating through tradition, relationships, ceremony, and continuity. William was portrayed as more corporate, more structured, and more willing to challenge the old system. His approach was simple. If someone creates a serious reputational threat to the institution, personal relationships cannot protect them forever. And that philosophy was about to collide with Camilla, because while Charles's health was deteriorating and William's responsibilities were increasing, rumors began circulating that Charles's future might involve something almost unimaginable: abdication. According to the sources cited in the original story, private discussions and rehearsals were allegedly taking place around a possible future transition. The idea was reportedly to make any departure appear measured, dignified, and centered on Charles's health, but one claim changed the entire meaning of the story. William had allegedly already taken on so much responsibility that an eventual abdication would simply formalize a transfer of power that had already happened behind the scenes. And if that was true, Camilla had a very serious problem. For decades, Camilla had fought her way back from being one of the most controversial figures in Britain. Her relationship with Charles had made her a target of enormous public anger. During Diana's 1995 Panorama interview, the famous reference to a marriage containing 3 people made the identity of the third person unmistakable to millions. After Diana's death in 1997, the public hostility toward Camilla intensified, yet Camilla continued forward. She married Charles in 2005, built a portfolio of charitable work, endured years of criticism, and eventually reached the unimaginable moment of being crowned Queen Consort in 2023. It was one of the greatest royal comebacks of the modern era. But one relationship never completely healed: Camilla and William. According to royal accounts cited in the original script, William had never forgotten the damage he believed Camilla's relationship with Charles had caused his family. He may have learned to remain controlled, but that did not mean the past had disappeared. Then Andrew's arrest created the perfect trigger. William reportedly demanded that Camilla distance herself completely from Sarah Ferguson. No private loyalty, no exceptions, no mixed signals. Camilla allegedly exploded. She reportedly argued that William was overstepping his authority, reminding Charles that William was not yet king and therefore had no right to issue orders to the Queen Consort. Then came the moment that allegedly changed everything. Charles chose William's position. The man Camilla had supported through decades of controversy was reportedly siding with his son at the exact moment she expected him to defend her. And the situation became even more complicated after Camilla appeared at an engagement involving Gisèle Pellicot, a French woman who became internationally known for making her abuse case public. Camilla presented herself as a supporter of abuse survivors, but critics quickly pointed toward her continued association with Sarah Ferguson and questioned whether the palace was applying different standards to different people. The contradiction became another weapon in the growing internal battle. William's message, according to the story, was becoming increasingly clear. Anyone who created a serious scandal for the monarchy could not expect personal relationships to protect them. That included Camilla, and while William was confronting the situation from one side, Catherine was becoming increasingly important from the other. In the aftermath of Andrew's arrest, Catherine was reportedly involved in crisis management discussions with senior palace figures and legal advisors. Her role reportedly infuriated Camilla, who believed Catherine's involvement made Charles and Camilla appear incapable of managing the institution themselves. Charles reportedly defended Catherine. Again, Camilla was losing ground, but there was another painful reality. Public attention naturally gravitated toward Catherine. She possessed a level of popularity and public affection that Camilla had spent decades trying to build in a different way. That difference became impossible to ignore at major diplomatic events. During the Trump state visit, insiders cited in the original story claimed that Donald Trump directed much of his attention toward Catherine, leaving Camilla feeling sidelined. Then came an alleged private incident involving Melania Trump. Camilla reportedly gestured for Catherine to leave during a private exchange, an incident that allegedly spread quickly among palace staff. What had previously been described as tension was now being portrayed as open warfare. And this is where the story takes its most dramatic turn. Catherine's allies were reportedly becoming more confident about the future. They were not simply defending her position, they were preparing for her future role as queen. Camilla, meanwhile, was watching her own influence shrink. Then Charles allegedly made a deeply personal request of William. He reportedly asked his son to give Camilla a place within the monarchy after his death or departure. He wanted her to retain dignity and some degree of security. William allegedly agreed. But there was a catch. The terms of that future would effectively belong to William. That meant Camilla's access, relevance, funding, and place within the institution could ultimately depend on the man who had never fully accepted her role in his family's story. And with Catherine beside him, William would control the direction of the monarchy. Think about the irony. Camilla had spent decades fighting to become accepted by the institution. She had survived public hatred, the shadow of Diana, years of criticism, and finally a coronation. Yet the woman who once seemed almost impossible to remove could now find herself depending on the approval of the future king and queen. And that brings us back to the opening question. What happens when a king who spent 70 years waiting for the crown becomes too ill to carry the institution alone? What happens when his heir begins making the decisions before officially becoming king? And what happens when the queen consort realizes that the people controlling her future are the very people she has been struggling against? The Andrew crisis may have started this chain reaction, but it appears to have exposed something much larger. A monarchy can survive a scandal. It can survive an unpopular royal. It can even survive a change of monarch. What it cannot easily survive is a battle over who actually holds power. And according to the story presented here, that battle is already underway. Charles may still be king. Camilla may still be queen consort. William may still be waiting for the crown. And Catherine may still officially be the Princess of Wales. But behind the ceremony, behind the titles, and behind the carefully controlled public appearances, the balance of power may already be shifting. The most important question is no longer whether William will eventually become king. It is what happens to everyone else when he does. Because if the claims about this private transition are even partly accurate, Camilla's biggest battle may not be over. It may only be beginning.